Councillor Alexander, how are you going to win 6 seats, win full control of City of York Council, which is obviously your ultimate aim? It represents about an eighth of the total seats which are being contested next week, given Labour's lack of presence in wards which are now part of the York Outer constituency based on the last election.
Well, it's no secret that it's difficult for Labour to win in a lot of rural areas up and down the country. But we've fought a strong campaign in York Outer. We've got almost 10,000 votes at the general election. And a lot of people in those areas voted Liberal Democrat to stop the Conservatives, and they feel incredibly let down. So since the general election, they've said, why did we vote Liberal Democrat to stop the Tories when they've supported the Tories anyway? And so therefore a lot of those people are coming back to Labour. And a lot of people predict that York Outer, Labour is the second party there. And we're getting a very good response on the doorstep. We're getting good response in areas like Fulford, like Heslington and so on. And we are seeing that some of these wards that we used to hold some time ago are now coming back to Labour.
But going back to it, based on everything that you said and your aims for this election, would anything other than taking full control of City of York Council be regarded as a failure by Labour?
Well, we haven't controlled the council in the last 8 years. Before that, when we were in control, it was in a minority administration. And it is difficult to have that jump. We've gone through a transformational process in York, trying to transform the local Labour Party. We have a new candidates, a new set of policies, and it will be difficult, it will be close, but a lot of people are showing us some very, very good support, and I think we can do it.
Okay. Moving to the economic crisis, which the country is still embroiled in, Labour was in charge at a national level when this arose, so why should people trust the party at a local level?
Well, it was a global economic crisis, and no matter who was in control of the government, we would have had these difficulties. We've seen the problems in Greece, the problems in Portugal, the problems in Ireland, in France, in the USA. And also, Labour believed that it was right to bail out UK banks to save depositors' savings. The Conservatives wouldn't have supported that. You would have seen more run on banks, and we would have been in more difficulty. And what gets to me is that the Conservatives were agreeing to all of Labour's spending plans as late as January last year. And yet now they're saying that that was all wrong. And here in York, the Labour government gave this council an additional £52 million over the last 8 years. And each year the Liberal Democrats said this wasn't enough money. They didn't say, stop giving it to us, you're overspending. They said, we want more. And when you look at the financial situation in York, the council debts are increasing. We can see a situation where actually they put forward, Liberal Democrats with Conservative support, a budget which increases the debt position of this council over and above what Labour would have done, and are paying more on debt interest. We have a plan for saving just under £1 million worth of services by cutting down on local Liberal Democrat waste, and that would also lower the debt position of the council.
On top of that, one of your pledges in your manifesto for the forthcoming local elections is to reverse cuts to services which were agreed at the recent budget. But you are, in some ways, at the mercy of the national government agenda, and with further reductions in spending likely, should you be in full control during the term of that administration, how would you cope with that in future years, and how will you find the reversals of cuts you promised in areas such as social care?
Well, we think you've got to have an honest discussion with the public on this. It's going to be a difficult situation. The government is cutting our funding. Labour disagrees with the scale and the depth and speed of these cuts, but they are coming anyway. And it depends where you prioritise and what services you operate. We have said that we will set up a thing we call the Fairness Commission, an independently chaired committee that will actually have public face-to-face meetings to actually discuss the 838 services the council operates, and then discusses which ones we should continue operating, which ones we shouldn't, which we need, which we don't, who's going to pay for them and who's going to run them. And we could see some services go to other public sector organisations. We could see some services set up as cooperatives and mutuals by existing workers, and you will see some services go that the public feel that we don't need to operate. But we feel that way you will have a council that actually delivers the services at a price people can afford, the services that people want. And we also believe that we can actually strip out a lot of the local Liberal Democrat waste to be able to save some services that are important to us. In terms of the social care costs, I mean, we're talking about £1.70 a day transport costs going up to £7 a journey. We're talking about the actual social activity costs going up from £6.85 a day to £5 an hour. There's old ladies in Micklegate saying to our councillors, that's it now, I cannot leave my house, and we feel this is wrong. And I'd love to get rid of the costs altogether, but there's no money to do that. So what we will do is scrap the Liberal Democrat planned 1.4 million second new council office in Acomb and use the debt repayment funding on that to be able to halve that increase and actually be able to help some elderly people still achieve those social care.
Moving on to other issues, why does your manifesto not mention specifically the community stadium project, which is a matter close to the hearts of a lot of people who will be voting next week in York?
Well, we've gone on record with giving our full support to the community stadium project. That hasn't changed. We are fully behind it. And there are many other items that we're very equally passionately about that are not in the manifesto. I mean, for example, we want to reverse cuts to disabled children's childcare equipment, and that's not in there either. But I think people are quite cynical about putting in the populist policies such as that into a manifesto, because in 2007 the local Liberal Democrats pledged to have a new community stadium. 4 years later they're putting it in their next manifesto because it hasn't been delivered. And I think that people should judge us on our actions and not just some of the populist promises that people put forward in manifestos.
You do support the community stadium
Yes.
project. How will you plan to support that? Should you take control of the council?
Well, we've already started a process of actually opening up the discussions about it. Before, the process was one councillor, Councillor Steve Galloway, sitting with the other partners such as the rugby and football club, and simply dictating how this was going to work in the future. And what we said is, this is not fair, this is not accountable. We need to have the other parties brought in because you need cross-party consensus over this issue. And we know the Conservatives don't support the community stadium project, but we do, and we are in there in the meetings now actually trying to safeguard the interests of the rugby club because John Guildford isn't there at those meetings. And we want to see that continue, and him would have a constant invite to that, to bring him to the table and actually try and have a genuine community stadium in the interests of not only the two professional clubs in York, but also residents in York. You know, we believe that we can have genuine community facilities there that are very, very important, and it's a huge opportunity. It can be done, but it is very difficult. You've got to actually make sure that all the sales and all the rest of the different land and planning permissions come in the right order at the right time. But it can be done, I'm confident it can be done, and we're fully behind it.
The press is running its Get York Moving campaign, which is intended to support the Access York scheme to create new park and ride sites in the city and help reduce congestion. What are Labour's plans to reduce congestion should you take control of the council?
Well, there's a few things. First of all, we want to be tough on congestion without a congestion charge. We want to actually put more money from the council into our park and ride sites. We wrote to all government ministers regarding the funding that was allocated by the previous government that the new government has withdrawn, and they've said that the council needs to show more of a financial commitment to ensure the funding. We are doing that. We want to do that in our budget. We realise how important it is for our local businesses, but also we believe that the bus services need to be improved if you're going to get people out of your cars. And the only way we feel that we can do that is by having proper bus regulation powers, making sure that we can introduce cross-ticketing, we can extend the Eurozone card, and make sure that we have an efficient, integrated bus transport system in this city.
Two other developments that you mentioned in your manifesto, which you pledged to work towards, are returning a city centre pool and progressing the York Central development. How would you do this?
Well, since the loss of the pool at the Barbican, the figures have shown that we've actually lost the number of people swimming in this city and they haven't gone anywhere else. And we believe that that should be replaced and it should be a city centre pool. However, it is in our manifesto as a long-term aspiration. We realise the financial difficulties at the moment, and it'd be silly for me to say, you know, vote Labour and you're going to get a city centre swimming pool the next day. It's not going to happen. But what we are saying is that when opportunities arise, Labour will have that at the forefront of their minds. They will try and seek developer contributions. When we see the York Central site getting off the ground, we will want to seek opportunities for the city centre pool, and we will want to be able to deliver it at some point in the future. That is one of the, our core beliefs. But in terms of the York Central site, one of the difficulties that there's been with it is simply it's been just talked about for years. I mean, it's sitting there, it's a huge amount of land, and it has a huge opportunity for this city. And I think the local economy will be made or broken based on that development in the next few years. And I want to see that we have a proper vision for that site, and we go out there and we sell that vision, and it has to be cross-party agreed. And that vision needs to be in the interest of York to create economic opportunities in employment. It needs to also create leisure facilities, and it also needs to help with housing allocation. And once we have that plan and we have the developers on board, then we can start work on it. Until you've got a vision of what you're actually trying to achieve, you're not going to achieve anything. And I think that's been the problem, that lack of direction from the current Liberal Democrat Council administration.
You touched on housing allocation there, and
Yeah.
that has become quite a high-profile issue recently, particularly at the last meeting of the full council.
Yeah.
You don't agree with the current housing figures included within the local development framework, and you want to build more than that.
Yeah.
How would you do that without harming the green belt, then?
Well, first of all, there have been studies shown that York requires 1,200 new homes a year. And the regional spatial strategy that was developed by the previous government, which was evidence-based, showed that you could get away with 850 a year if you had increased congestion from areas such as Moulton and Thirsk. We're actually saying, okay, maybe that's not achievable, let's have 800. But we do need that housing. Businesses are saying to us that not only would that help the local building economy, but also it will actually help with regards to workforce, because otherwise you're going to get increased congestion. We've already got gridlock in the city centre, and you're going to have businesses allocating in other places and not in York. You're going to have people in York who are born and bred here that will not be able to afford to live here because of constrained housing supply. The housing figures being kept as they are means that house prices will rise and the rents will rise, and those people will have to relocate to other places. We don't feel it's fair that people who live in different areas in York cannot afford to live and raise a family in the areas that they were born in. Now, that's all well and good, but in terms of the green belt has not been defined. It's been discussed many, many times, but it hasn't been defined in law. And without a defined green belt, and with changes in government planning legislation, you're going to end up in a situation where people can just have a free-for-all and build pretty much wherever they want. I mean, in the budget announced a couple of weeks ago, the Chancellor in that budget allowed the change of use in buildings without planning consent. You're going to see pubs turning into housing, you're going to see shops being bought in York being turned into housing, and we disagree with that. We say you need to have an agreed planning framework that can actually protect our heritage and protect our green belt. And the only way you're going to be able to do that is by putting forward a plan that has the sound amount of housing that actually fits our local economy and our needs. And that's why we say it needs to be 800. The York Economic Partnership agrees with that there should be more housing. Without Walls Partnership agrees there should be more housing. Council officers agree that there should be more housing. The Chamber of Commerce agrees that there needs to be more housing. And I think the housing developers and building sector will also agree with that. And what we're saying is, unless you've put forward that sound plan, because at the moment the officers are saying it's unsound, you end up in a situation where there will be no defined green belt in law, and people will be able to build on that wherever they want.
Moving on to next week, next Friday is when you'll discover the outcome. You've said previously that the Labour Party has looked to York, the Labour Party at national level has looked to York as a sort of a barometer for its prospects across the UK, and it does see it as an authority where the party can take control. It's also your first election as the leader of the party in York. How much pressure do you feel under personally to deliver?
Well, of course there's some pressure there. It would be unnatural if there wasn't. But I do thrive on it, I do enjoy the pressure, and it does spur me on to keep fighting for local people. And I believe that I've done a good job as a leader of the group and leading the party into these local elections, and it's going to be up to local people to decide whether they want a Labour council or whether they want a possible Liberal Democrat Tory coalition in York.
And just to conclude, in a nutshell, there's a week left for people who may be undecided to make up their minds. Why should they vote you into full control of the council?
People are fed up with local Liberal Democrat council waste. They are frightened about the cuts coming from the Conservative Liberal Democrat government. The local Liberal Democrats will not rule out a coalition with the Conservatives, and the coalition that's in Downing Street could be coming next week to your street and your council. And we believe that Labour is the only credible alternative to this, and we believe that a Labour council will be the voice for people in tough times, because York deserves better.